this is how you will see a dramatic change. Because when you see something of, this is the situation, this is how I'm setting up my experiment, this is going to be my approach, and then the result is a result. Like you were testing a hypothesis at the end of the process. Welcome to the Open Delta podcast, where we believe that you are here to be more, not do more. I am your host, Eileen, and as a coach, speaker, and consultant, I will help you manifest your dream life that can bring you more power, peace, and cash. If you're ready to dive into the mindset, neuroscience, and connection to the universe, vamos a darle. Welcome back to Open Delta, where we explore transformative journeys in leadership, personal development, and mindset. And today I am so excited to be talking to you about going from fear to freedom. And this is all about psychological safety, transforming leadership. Most of what we're going to talk about today, it's more from examples and career. However, it also can apply to your personal relationships and how you show up to interpersonal relationships. So I honestly am very grateful for the mishaps and some of the challenges that I've experienced throughout my career, because if not, I would not have some of the good examples that I will be sharing with you today. So I'm grateful for the previous version of Eileen that endured, learned, and really transcended some of those experiences for us to be chatting about this today. So to get started and get grounded, I want to speak to what I am defining as psychological safety. And this is cultivating the environment in where people feel safe to express their thoughts, their ideas, their feelings, concerns, without the fear of judgment, without the fear of someone's going to punish them, and without the fear of being humiliating. This is the shared belief within that group, with that team, that family group, that take interpersonal risks without having the negative consequences to either their self-esteem, to their status, to their career, to their role within that group. And I am excited to talk about this because as soon as I understood this and was able to manage my mindset around what were the things going wrong and what were some of the things that I needed to understand in order to thrive within a team, it really made my life better. So I hope the same for you today. And psychological safety can eliminate fear within a team, can foster innovation, and create more thriving teams. So this is number one thing that I really want us to ground ourselves so you can get more done faster with more quality and hopefully with more collaboration within your teams, wherever you take this concept of psychological safety to. So actually this term of psychological safety was coined by a Harvard professor, Dr. Amy Edmondson, and she defined this as the belief that one can speak up, take risk, and be themselves without the fear of negative consequences. And so she was studying what were the team dynamics and what were the factors that could really accentuate those high-performing teams. And this is the result of her research, having a high psychological safety that is critical for, like I said, fostering innovation, collaboration, and high performance, because that led to more open communication, problem solving, and learning. And so those are things that we always strive for, having open communication, problem solving, and learning. But how do we really create the environment that allows for those things to happen? It doesn't just come naturally for everyone, especially if you have very diverse teams, which a lot of companies and groups are pushing for, that they have different perspectives. So what is it that you as a leader or be as a contributor of a team that you need to do or need to contribute in order to also have that high sense of psychological safety? I will share some examples from me being a contributor to a psychological safety, or as a leader, as a manager, and as a business owner now, of how can you engage with that. I do want to preface with, this is not your manager's responsibilities. This is not just like the CEO's responsibility. This is a collective exercise, day in and day out. And a big portion, it is, yes, the leader of the team, or I'm going to say like the head of the team, whoever is held accountable for that team, but everyone is the leader within that cohort, within that group, within that team. So when people feel psychologically safe, they are more likely to have more open communication, which leads to productive conflict resolution. You are able to have more creative ideas. I can't remember the term, but there's a term that when I share an idea, it might be an adjacent idea that you get by what I said, which is like nothing to do with what I said, but something in your brain really sparked interest in this other idea. And when you do that enough times by having that diverse team, then you're going to have a very innovative idea. But it all started by Eileen talking about how she likes elephants, and elephants have very good memory, yada, yada, yada. And then someone can think about, let's say, another animal that has nothing to do with the elephants or the high memory, but for whatever reason, that really sparked the interest of the other person thinking about the other animal. So it's not so much about like the content that I'm saying, it's about everyone picking up what they need to pick up in order to really contribute back to the team to solve the problem or create a more innovative solution to a project. Another thing that's very important is like learning from mistakes. This is incredibly important whenever you have a mixture of very senior people on the team and then your more junior people on the team. Maybe the senior people on the team have experienced a lot more than those junior people. And so learning from those mistakes, learning from those best practices are very, very important. However, let's say the senior people are not going to be called to share if they don't have that psychological safety, or maybe they're called to share and really the junior people are not really looking to absorb those lessons learned if there's no psychological safety. Because at the end of the day, the underlying theme is collaboration and trust. And so you want to make sure that in order to have that dynamic, that team dynamic within your group, that people are learning constantly from each other in a positive way, and that will end up making your organization or team a lot more resilient. The last thing that I will say in terms of Dr. Edmondson's research is that psychological safety, she was able to link that to one of the key items of successful leadership, especially in environments that rely on teamwork and continuous improvement. And at this point, I think all of our teams everywhere are relying on teamwork and continuous improvement. One of the things to consider when we're talking about leadership, and this came up also through her research, was the concept of fear-based leadership. And I think we've all experienced that one manager that is micromanaging, that doesn't tell you feedback on the spot in a constructive way. And maybe you hear about it months down the line when you could have done something about it months before. Or this is the manager probably, or not manager, but just the team in general, that they have a blame culture, meaning that, whenever there's a problem, there's always someone to blame. And I believe that when something goes wrong, there is definitely someone that is responsible and that should be accountable. But the word blame and pointing fingers is not helpful in any situation, in my opinion. So having fear-based leadership, really, it's the perfect environment for lack of innovation, high employee turnover, people leaving left and right, and low morale. And I think those are some of like the red flags whenever you want to really cultivate a team, when you want to have a collaborative environment to create more solutions. Those are some of the red flags. When I was an intern and I think it was like probably my second internship, I had a manager that when anything will go wrong, he would always try to find out like who was the person to blame. And I had never worked in corporate at that point. My first internship was with the U.S. Coast Guard, and probably this is a story for later. And they have a different style for leadership, and especially I was interning with the academy for like cadets, and so they're trying to break them to see, who's gonna make it through the academy or not. Anyways, that was an experience on its own. And then that was my first experience in corporate. And I could just tell myself, like, this is not right. And this is not how I think a high performance team should work. A, we were not a high performing team. And then B, I think it really sparked a lot of self-doubt in myself because I had a different expectation of what that team would look like. And it turned it out that it wasn't. And at that point, talking about the disco ball effect, I was not happy with that little square because it was reflecting things that I didn't like about myself. And whenever something would go wrong, especially if there was something that I did wrong out of pure ignorance, out of pure, I didn't know better, I didn't have the support system to know what was right or what was wrong. And having someone always point the finger at you makes you feel that there's something wrong with you. And that is the door to a lot of different things, friends, like self-doubt, imposter syndrome, shame, and just crippling self-doubt, which I already said, but it was just like this very constant circle of doubting myself. And it was definitely a learning experience to A, managing my mindset, B, asking for more clarification questions and knowing what are the expectations when this task needs to be completed. What are the metrics of success? That way I know I can calibrate to what the right expectations are rather than just doing something. Even though I have a lack of leadership and lack of clarity, at least I'm asking some of the questions to avoid this in the future. Fast forward to end of the internship, I got a very good review and the manager was really happy with my performance. Yet I wasn't happy how I performed, but it was a huge learning lesson on how low performance teams work, which I can work with that so I can now transition those lessons and those pain points into what I don't want to do in the workplace with my teams, with my family, and how I show up as a leader in many other different ways. To close the chisme, when I left as an intern, I had an end date, and a lot of the other team members that were full-time employees, little by little, started leaving again after I left. So it wasn't a reflection on me. This is when I had done more work and trying to uncover the bigger lesson from that internship. I think that was validation from there was nothing that I was doing wrong. There was just a lot of things to learn, and I wasn't the only one experiencing those things. There were other full-time employees that also felt that way, and eventually they either left the company or found new teams within the organization that they could transition to. So we all hopefully will have some sort of experiences like that, just because there is so much knowledge that I can share with you and some of those examples. However, they don't stay with you ingrained unless you experience to some degree those experiences. So I hope they're very mild and that they don't move you in ways that it shouldn't. But now I want to transition a little bit more on like the connection between psychological safety and high performance teams, because thankfully I learned from that experience, and moving on to different teams, I've been able to actually cultivate and experience firsthand some of those high levels of psychological safety that have made me thrive and really boost my career forward, thanks to having that psychological safety, being able to be more bold in my ask and how I show up in my career that has led me to my career progression. So the first one has been the safety to admit mistakes. And I would say this one was one of the ones that have taken me the most time, just because at least growing up, I've been conditioned to think that our mistakes are our fault, and kind of like the condition from that manager. Growing up, there was, if like me and my brother were fighting and then we suddenly were both crying, or one of us was crying, the first question that would come up, ¿Quién le pegó a quién? Like, who was it? And I think growing up with like years and years of that sort of mindset from my parents and even just like my greater family, it was very difficult and challenging to say, hey, it was me in the workplace, and say, and this is a mitigation plan. This is how we're going to move forward, and this is how it's being mitigated. And so I think just having the ability to own up to mistakes and also come up with solutions, this is something that has been really great from if you make a mistake, it's fine. B, figuring out A, what is the impact of that mistake? B, who needs to be informed about that mistake based on that impact? C, what are we doing to resolve it at the moment as like a hot fix, like this needs to be fixed right now? And then B, how are we going to make sure that this doesn't happen again in the future? I think those four things have really helped me, knowing that there's always a path forward when I make mistakes. And the sooner that I communicate mistakes, the better, because potentially there's more options in how we can mitigate those issues. And I still struggle with that every now and then. And it's a work in progress, as a lot of different things in our lives. The second one, and creating a psychological safe space, is being confident in raising questions and proposing new ideas. I've also struggled with this one. And the reason is because we have been conditioned to think that we need to know everything. And I think mainly this one came from school, because anytime we have a test, anytime we have a quiz, like we need to know everything that we've covered in those chapters and that quarter and that semester, like a midterm or a final, because we need to know everything from the past. And I think a lot of the critical thinking component really comes in your upperclassmen years in college. And potentially we don't have a lot of opportunities in school to think critically. At least from my experience, it was very much like back looking and not really forward looking. And so thinking that my question is valid is worth of asking, because I don't want to look stupid or whatever BS I used to tell myself. However, I think from those questions, back to the example that I gave before, by me asking or raising a concern, I could be sparking another question or another thought in somebody else. And so I think proposing new ideas, it's something that I'm trying to get better at doing it quicker, because a lot of the times what has happened is that we're having a discussion, I ask a question or two, there's people that asked more questions, or in my head, like more intelligent questions, but the fact that it's kind of like that spotlight effect of you think that everyone's thinking about what you said or what you did or what you're wearing or whatever. And it's really about for the betterment of whatever you're solving for, whether it's a project, whether it's a problem that you're facing. And so I think that confident piece of, hey, I have something to say and this is my question or this is my idea, it's very, very important to continue contributing again to that psychological safety space. Because like I said before, I don't want this to come across of like, oh, I should only listen to this if I'm a leader of a team. This is for everyone as a leader, as a contributor of some sort of group, organization, team, etc. The third one that kind of goes along with that is comfortable offering different perspectives. Growing up, we had to conform with the norm. Like I remember that I was always told, don't ruffle any feathers. The term of like, ahorita te vas más bonita porque no queremos que haya problema if you say what you have to say. So I think, I feel that I'm saying that I've struggled with all of this, but that's true. I think having and this is probably because I've never really experienced until recent years how to have a adult mature conversation where you share different perspectives. It's something that didn't come naturally to me. Now I'm able to have a lot of those discussions that you're able to bring your point forward and you also respect whatever the other person's bringing forward. And I think that there's so much power with having a different conversation about something that you do not know everything about or you don't understand it yet. I think that's completely okay. And one of the things that I loved about one of my previous projects was that my client actually was from good old Tennessee, and they loved hunting and fishing and all these other things that I honestly haven't really been exposed to, and just asking questions about, what did you fish this weekend? Or them explaining to me the process of hunting. I didn't really have a lot of different things to offer of like, oh, you could also do this, or have you ever tried this? However, asking questions and understanding their perspective, how they grew up, what they like to do, also gave me the opportunity to get to know them a little bit better. Which now when we were solving problems, once we had also that personal connection because we were talking about whatever we're doing on the weekend, even though I don't really enjoy small talk, it was a very good tool for us to offer each other different perspectives. And then the last one that I'll share on how to contribute to that psychological safety component is to be empowered to challenge the status quo. This will only happen when we don't have retaliation in the workforce, in your team, because a lot of the times I think we don't like to challenge the status quo because what happens if they, if we clap that way, if they're going to clap back at us. And I think you should definitely be informed on, what are the ways of working on your team. At Accenture, they have a very clear policy, enterprise policy on there's no retaliation on a lot of different things. However, I think challenging the status quo, if you want to have a high-performing, very innovative team, this is necessary, because if you are doing things the way that you've been doing it for the last 10, 20, 30 years, then how can you have innovation if you don't challenge the status quo? Some other examples that I want to share with you on practical steps, honestly, to build psychological safety. The first one is one of my favorite ones, is active listening. Listening to understand the other person, to listen without judgment, and not listening to respond. I think we do this a lot. Just someone's speaking to you and you're already thinking like, oh, what am I going to say back, instead of just truly listening what they're telling you and what they're saying. Listening to the language that they're speaking, I think to me it's the sauce of this example, because you get to really understand what are they concerned or worried about just by little words here and there that they say. I was talking to one of my more junior team members, and he was saying something about, he kept saying, I want to do more, I want to do more, I want to do more. And it was very interesting once I asked him, what is his concept of you want to do more, you want to do more? He's doing enough, and he's doing a great job at what he's doing. However, he was unconsciously equating doing more with more productivity, with higher performance, because he is a first generation student or first generation professional, just like I am. And like many of our parents, like many of ourselves even, and our grandparents, we used to work hourly jobs. And if you worked more hours, that meant more money, that meant more money to spend in your family, that meant more X, insert whatever you want more of. And so in corporate, we work a salary job. And in his brain, he wanted to do more because he was equating that to producing more and having a better performance. But that necessarily wasn't true. And it wasn't until we got to that root of, it's not that he wants to do more for the sake of doing more. He wants to do more quality work. I weren't able to get to that and help him and figure out, that tiny little line that was unconsciously being repeated if I wasn't actively listening to the words that he was saying. And I'm not saying that every conversation with everyone is going to be like that. However, I do think the way we speak has a lot of power, and the way we communicate shows a lot about how we are internalizing and externalizing things to our teams. And it's up to the listener, regardless whether you're a team manager, a contributor, hermana, novia, esposa, whatever. It's up to the listener if you want to pick up on those bits of connection to a certain extent in order to draw the information back and or have a conversation about what you're speaking. Another practical example is encouraging open feedback. It's a two-way street. And giving constructive criticism or feedback to someone is incredibly important and a skill that we should all develop. And the simplest example that I'll share is the sandwich approach. Always start with something that was positive, something that was done correctly. Second, it's give the feedback using a lot of I statements in a positive way, and then close it out in a way of moving forward, let's do this. And I like to include myself in there just because a lot of the times there's something that I also could have done to make that particular task or project a little bit more productive. So when I was interviewing for Accenture years and years ago, it's when Accenture was still doing case studies for the development programs that I was applying for. And they used to give you a little literal sheet of paper with the case information, and you could highlight it. They give you a pad so you can write your notes and do the math and approach the problem as if you were a consultant for the firm and the interviewer, a director, was your client. So here I am asking my question, writing my notes. And then when I did all my math, I essentially mixed all my numbers from client A I use the numbers for client B, and vice versa. Numbers from client B, I use the numbers from client A. So when I'm explaining my answer, we have a whiteboard and I'm explaining everything. The director is just like looking at me saying everything makes sense except the numbers are not adding up. And so his question was to ask me about, can you show me how you got to those numbers? And I'm doing a double click on all my math, and I show him my chicken scratch of notes with all the math involved. And he looks at me and he tells me, "You're wrong." And I was like, cool, I was not prepared for that piece of feedback. However, he was simulating how sometimes clients give you feedback. And I don't remember exactly what I asked him for. However, I said something, "Can you show me what you mean by I'm wrong? I would like to understand your point of view." Something to that nature. So then he kind of relaxed his shoulders, and then we sat down together and, he was explaining the numbers. And then we arrived to the conclusion that I had used the wrong data. However, the approach was correct. And I came out of the interview feeling so defeated. I was like, I'm not getting this job. I'm not getting the role. And I was just saying to myself, like, this is it. That was a great experience. I had never actually done a case interview other than like the prep work for that interview. However, I was like, I think I had very good questions. I think I did the best that I could have done. And I was happy with my so-called performance with my interview. However, I was very hesitant that I was going to get a call back. And I don't know exactly what he thought of me or what he said to himself after I left the interview. However, weeks later, I get a call from Ilenia, shout out to Ilenia, and she gave me the offer. And I was in so much disbelief. It was during Thanksgiving break, and I was so surprised. And last week that I was at the office, he was there. My interviewer that gave me that interview and gave me that feedback was there, and I shared this story. And part of the conversation that we talked about is because I took that feedback very open-minded, and I was able to hear out the client, simulated client, and how they were walking me through things, because essentially a lot of the times when we go in and work with clients, we're solving their problems. And so we also got to understand like what the other person is going through, whether that is your mom, your brother, esposo, or client in this scenario. And so I think open feedback, whether you are giving it or you are receiving it, it's a very important skill for contributing to psychological safety. Next one that I want to talk about is celebrating failure as learning. And oh my God, I think this one is the one that I've been putting the most amount of work, because this is where we really emphasize that mistakes or so-called failures are part of growth. And the number one thing to me that has kept me small or kept me in whatever place is the fear of failure. And once we shift our mindset out of the fear of failure by not taking things personally. Los Cuatro Acuerdos is a great resource that really talks about not taking things personally. And then B, to me, this is how you not take things seriously, is seeing everything as an experiment. This is how you will see a dramatic change. Because when you see something of, this is a situation, this is how I'm setting up my experiment, this is going to be my approach, and then the result is a result. Like, you were testing a hypothesis at the end of the process. If you want to model this as a scientific experiment like we were in middle school or high school whenever we learned that. Do that. It's so helpful to think about problems and situations as an experiment, because that removes you from being so in the center of whatever that situation is. I could have blamed myself for a problem at work when I did X decision or I sent X email. But when I look at it as the situation is that I need to send this email to very high up people in the company. B, this is my approach. This is what I'm trying to say. This is why I did it. And then you send it. And then let's say you hear back that that wasn't the right approach or that wasn't the right thing to say. If you look at it through the lens of like, this is an experiment, you will say, okay, that is not how it works. Those were the consequences. Next time that I am running this experiment, I'm going to have a different approach. And that might be part of, the mitigation approach that you come up from the last experiment. So that honestly has been life-changing for me, thinking of things as experiment, including this podcast. I think a few years back, I would have never had the courage to put this podcast if I wanted to not fail, because things are going to go wrong. Audio might be off. Reels might be posted late. Podcasts might be delayed. I'm producing this with my primo Alberto. Like, Alberto might have class or work or situations that come up and we're delayed for whatever reason. However, we know that if those things happen, those will be part of that we have a rubric or, a detailed way of documenting that was our approach. The outcome was some sort of delay. Okay, cool. We now know that I need to record X days, weeks in advance in order to have those podcast episodes released on a certain time. So please, highly encourage you to look at relationships, work, different types of projects as an experiment. That way you are able to release that expectation, release that fear of failure, and look at things as, I'm just trying things out. I'm going to figure out how things don't work, and I'm going to focus on the things that I know do work. I got excited. And the last practical example that I'll give you is to model vulnerability. And this is the whole notion of leading by example, being open about your own challenges. And a big example for me has been this podcast. I think a lot of my lessons, a lot of my life experiences, I'm pouring into this podcast, and I am hoping to create that psychological safety also for my guests, for them to really give you the vulnerable and the raw and the deep, deep emotions, for them to characterize, I'm trying to find the word, like for them to put words to their challenges, for those to be words of wisdom for you. And that way you're ahead on those types of situations that we have experienced. And so I think whenever you go through something and you've internalized it, you've understood what were the lessons, what was the wisdom that was coming from those experiences, I think it's amazing if you can share those, if you can verbalize is the word that I was looking for, if you can verbalize those and share them out. Because I think one of the things that I started doing when I was in high recruiting season, that I was trying to look for a job and getting interviews, we will talk more about the STAR method, situation, task, action, result, that has been published, and it's almost everywhere that you go for career coaching advice. However, I also incorporated like the second R, which is the reflection part, and that is really, what did you learn about that experience? I think the R as a recruiter, now that I've been on the other side of recruiting undergrad and full-time employees, has been, what is the level of self-awareness that this candidate has, that if they approach everything in this manner and they're able to self-assess a situation and figure out what are those moments of reflection that are going to feed into your next team, your next project, your next adventure in general, that has been key for not only what is it that you're reflecting about, but how is this going to have a trickle effect down the line. So for psychological safety to work, you need rapport. That is the first step. And we'll have a podcast episode on communication and unconscious actions and things that you can do to build rapport at an unconscious level. However, I think having those relationships in your teams are important for psychological safety to be ingrained as part of your cultural fabric. So if you are new to the team, I would encourage you to have one-on-one conversations with your different team members to get to know them, know what their motivations are. One of the things that I love to do as a manager, as an executive, is whenever I'm working with a new team member, I have a one-on-one with them to knowing where are they in their career progression, and knowing those ambitions helps me understand how can I support them in the process. For example, if they are trying to get promoted, if they are not on path to have all the check marks that they need to get promoted, then if I have influence in creating an opportunity for them, I am going to do that. However, I would have not known that if I hadn't had the conversation in that particular one-on-one. So having rapport, whichever way you feel that is most natural for you, it's a very, very, very important step. And probably my favorite experience, my favorite example that I'll share with you on a real life experience that I had with one of my managers was when I was very, very early on in my career. I was learning the client. It was an industry that I had no idea about when I joined the project. I didn't know. I was trying to understand what we were trying to do. However, I didn't know how I could contribute. I have something on my eye. And my manager had a very intimidating voice. And most of our conversations, if we weren't in person, it was all through Teams. And one thing that was so simple. However, it was so magical for me in terms of having the power to say what I want, is whenever we would finish the conversation, we were wrapping up the call, and he would go around the room and ask, so-and-so, any thoughts or comments that you want to share? And then that person will be able to say yes, and then say their piece, or say no, and then he will move on to the next person. And why do I think this is important, especially for people who are more junior in the team? It's because sometimes you have an idea. However, there's a lot of back and forth chatter between the more senior people on the team, or maybe just like the chatty people on the team. They don't have to be senior people on the team. There's just people that love to talk and speak their opinion. And he will give an opportunity for anyone that, let's say they hadn't had an opportunity now to say what they wanted to say. And so he would go around the room, and then let's say, Eileen, do you have anything to share? And I had the microphone, I had the room, I had the space to express myself freely and say, yes, when we're talking about this, I also want to contribute this piece. And so I think him giving the mic, him giving the power to every single team member in the call, of course, this is depending on the context of the conversation. However, sometimes this is why being in person matters so much, or having video on, because you can really understand the tonality and the body language of a person. And him handing the mic, him handing the power to someone that probably maybe doesn't feel empowered at the moment because they're understanding the team dynamics, they probably won't know what level of the level of psychological safety that team has until a couple weeks into the interactions engagement in the team. So to me, it motivated a lot more when he gave me the power and I could speak my mind, speak my word. And then if I didn't have anything to say, I also had the power to say no. And so it really motivated me to bring my whole self to the table. I had the room to myself to speak my mind. And I thank him quite often for that, because it was very early on in my career. And from being in different teams, being in different pocket groups, it's not always the case. So if you have the influence to do something similar, if you think that will be helpful, I truly encourage you to do that. And I also hope that you take the opportunity to figure out what's your open delta, what's your opportunity for growth. And I'll leave you with one quote that I thought it was very fitting for this topic. And that is, when we lead with safety and trust, we free our teams and ourselves to reach new heights. So I hope that you find your open delta, your opportunity to grow, and I will see you reaching new heights. Bye.